Coach Zack, appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Hey, man, I just want to give a big up to you a lot through my coaching career. I learned a lot from you, and it definitely had a huge impact on the stuff that I do every day now. So I thought it was important to kind of bring you on to share your expertise and your knowledge in the field as well. So I think you can relate a lot to this. Obviously, with the job of working with athletes, we deal with parents a lot.
Right.
And a lot of the things that we get from parents a lot is like, when the kids are young, they're like, hey, I'm okay with the running, I'm okay with that stuff, but I kind of want to keep them out of the weight room right now. And I feel like my child is, it's too young, it might stunt their growth, things like that. And realistically, I think you would hopefully agree with me, if you don't, this is an awkward video, but I think it's almost the opposite. You want them in the weight room, under the right supervision, of course, under the right guidance, of course. You don't want them doing stupid things, but the weight room is like a big part of their growth and development, especially as an athlete.
Right. No, absolutely. I agree with that entirely. I think that if anything, it just gives the kids more of an advantage from a coordination standpoint, from a neurological standpoint, right? There's a lot of science, I think, that kind of backs it, in terms of the benefits of getting them into strength training and into the weight room. But, the whole thing about stunting growth, I think that's a biased opinion or myth even. It's been proven that, just the simple fact of the bone density of the younger athletes, it's strengthened, it becomes stronger by dealing with resistance. I think that alone kind of debunks the whole myth. So yeah, that's kind of where I'd like to start for sure.
Yeah, so in my opinion, through my experience, the one way you could really stunt kids' growth is number one, if you damage a growth plate. So if you have a kid irresponsible in the weight room without guidance, and God forbid they hurt themselves around the growth plate, then yeah, it might mess them up in their development and their growing. But if they're under the proper guidance and they're progressed and regressed properly and taught how to move in the weight room setting, I think that is an important piece that parents need to push towards and be more open up towards.
Right, and you say something that's extremely important too, where you say proper guidance. I think that goes beyond just the coach within the weight room. I think that goes not only with the parents, but also what the kids are exposed to through social media. So, they have their TikTok, their Instagram, their Snapchats, the platforms where they see all these videos of people doing different types of workouts. And so proper guidance in terms of what they're seeing, what their expectations are coming into the weight room with their own coach, what the parents' expectations are, because some of these parents too are sold on videos, the way that kids get sold on videos. And so we have to take that with a grain of salt, I think, and kind of make it into, our own. And, it's only for the benefit of the athlete and the kid if, we can tell them, we shouldn't be doing 30-inch depth jumps, off of a box. And, they want to do those things because they see it. And as much as I respect it, I think it's important to be able to properly guide them, away from some of those things too. And, start with the foundation.
Absolutely. And it gets more even deeper than just parents being worried about kids' growth, things like that. I think it's also important in terms of psychological development and awareness and weight room etiquette and things like that. So if you have a kid that a parent was holding out of the weight room all up until they got into high school, right? And now they enter a high school weight room, which as a freshman, you're 14, 15, you got seniors that are 17, 18 years old. If they're throwing around big weights or performing lifts that they have no business doing, but they're kind of thrown into the fire. You know what I mean? But if they were exposed to them early on, the transition's way easier. And then even just from a mental standpoint, the benefits from your psychology from that type of resistance training is huge.
Right. So I agree. I think, as a coach, you're trying to prepare them, for the next level and for what's next to come, right? Whether it's through their sport or throughout life. And so preparing them for certain movement patterns, preparing them for certain types of loads, for certain types of routines, I think is huge. That's one of the things that I try to do personally with some of the close athletes that I've worked with. And it's always rewarding when you get to hear their feedback and you get, to communicate with them, and they share their appreciation with you about things that, you've done with them. So in terms of preparation, I think like I said, it only gives them, an edge, a competitive edge, a slight competitive edge. It's a foreign kind of stimulus, that you get to see how they deal with it. I think that's important too from a mental standpoint. If you're giving, a young mind something they're not familiar with, how are they going to handle that? And that branches off, into how they might handle adversity as they get older. You know what I mean? So I think by exposing them at a young age and starting them young, I think it can only bring good things.
Yeah, and then even like in terms of a time frame thing too, it gives them so much more time to build that experience within the weight room, to be able to be progressed to the higher level lifts, if you will. Like, so for example, I have a couple kids that are high school seniors that have never performed an Olympic lift, right? And they're on their way to play collegiate sports where the Olympic lifts are pretty heavily used. So we're going through a learning process now where they're getting frustrated. It's because it's a very technical thing to master and become good at. So because they were never exposed to it, now they're 18, 19 years old, senior in high school, about to go to a D1 school where, I mean, let's be real, a lot of them are still not proficient and good at it yet, but they're at least at a point where they can get it done in the weight room, where this guy is struggling pretty hard. If he was exposed early on, it would make his transition now to that level way much more smoother. And then he can focus more on progressing the weight rather than right now just trying to master a catch or a first or second pull.
Right. So a couple things there. I think, with the collegiate environment, they're pressed for time, right? There's only a certain amount of time you can have to, designate towards training. So if you can have a new student athlete come into your program and hit on all of those lifts, I think, it's a huge benefit to the overall program. I think it can save time, right? It also gives the student athlete that competitive edge where they don't feel like they have to play catch up. So starting them early in that sense brings its advantage, right? And then the other thing is too, when you introduce these lifts to them at an earlier age, there's no rush. So you can, in my opinion, you can just have a slow, gradual build, and progress into the advanced, heavier loads or movements. I think that, it's less of a steeper incline for them. You're not throwing too much at them at once where the athlete might shut down. Because I've had that happen where an athlete fails at a lift or isn't necessarily picking up the movement pattern the way that they want to, right? Because they have expectations, right?
Absolutely.
They're competitive. And I've had athletes shut down if they miss a lift, right? So you got to coach them up, when you see that happen. But I think by starting them at a younger age and exposing them to that, slowly but surely progressing it, it gives them an advantage to step into that next level, and kind of get ahead of the curve, so to speak.
Yeah, I think you said it perfectly when you said if you start them early, there's no rush. Whereas for the athlete that I'm speaking of, I almost feel rushed because he's wanting nothing but to progress the weight and get to where he wants to be weight-wise.
Right.
Where I'm trying to slow him down and trying to, get the technique and all the pulls done correctly. So it's like I'm rushed to try to get his technique to where it needs to be. He's rushed to try to get his weights to where he wants them to be. And like we were saying, if he started this a lot earlier, it'd be no rush. It would be a lot of time that we can take. And then, the sky would almost be the limit at that point just because of the experience you build. But we're kind of doing this a little bit backwards. I want you to put your stamp on it. Like, why would I pull you in for this conversation? To just talk a little bit about, athletes you've worked with and where you've gotten your experience from. Just to kind of put your stamp on, you belong in this seat talking about this stuff. You know what I mean?
I appreciate it. So I worked at the Parisi Speed School in Fair Lawn for about 5 years. And I did an internship at the University of Mississippi in the summer of 2018 for about 9 weeks during their off-season program with the football program, that is.
Mm-hmm. Who was their wide receiver at that time?
They had DK Metcalf, AJ Brown.
I heard of him before.
Elijah Moore. Yeah, they had those guys. The one thing I will say about those guys that stands out right away, that's super impressive, is just their work ethic. A lot of people, and this goes into the whole social media thing we talked about earlier. A lot of people, they see the pictures that get posted, during their training. These guys are chisels, right? They're ripped, freak athletes, right? And, credit goes to them. They work their tails off. I'll be the first one to say that as an intern, you come into that program, right? There's high standards, right? But also you see that the athletes are showing up when they don't have to. You see that the athletes are spending more time before, after a lift. And it's not only one or two, it's several of them in small groups, just trying to, raise the bar. That's something that stood out to me the most. With one of the biggest takeaways I had from that experience, I brought into my coaching is just the standards. And I think that's one thing, working with a younger population, maybe not collegiate, but high school or even middle school, right? I think that having standards for your athletes and holding every single one of them accountable is huge. Mm-hmm. I have seen and I have experienced, certain athletes not being held to the standard, and how it can have a detriment to their learning and their growth. I do want to emphasize to not be discouraged when an athlete is having some type of form of resistance with their training. I think it's huge to be able to handle hard and difficult coaching. So that's one of my biggest takeaways from that experience, which, I'm always going to hold dearly to me. I'm super grateful for. It's very humbling when you get to step in a room with, that level.
For sure. I think the two biggest takeaways here are for the parents of like the youth, the young kids that are athletes, right? Start them young. Don't be afraid. Find a coach that they can trust, right? Obviously, trust is a big thing between coach and a parent, especially when you're dealing with kids that are 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, what have you. So starting them young, not being afraid. Trust their coach and trust the coach to do right by your kid in terms of weight room, things like that. And then on an athlete standpoint is, you just said it before, be patient. Be patient with the lift, especially when things get tough, when they're exposed to new things. It's not easy off the bat. So be patient and trust. Same thing, trust the coach. You know what I mean? So I think to kind of help kids understand a little more, because you spent that time at Ole Miss. So these are Division I SEC football athletes, right? So Olympic lifts are huge in that program. with your experience with those 50 some odd guys in the weight room, I'm sure there was a handful, if not more of them, that weren't that efficient at the lift. Yes or no?
Yeah, I would say, you have your different levels of experience, and you can see it, right, with the coach's eye. You can see who's more comfortable, who might have more experience with this. I would say that, a lot of the athletes that I worked with during that time too was a lot of the new guys coming in. And that's why I tried to touch on that earlier, is if you're a new guy coming into that program, you want to try to hit the ground running. You want to try to, maximize your time there. And so if you can have that background prior to coming in, I think you get that competitive edge. I also think there's like a social kind of benefit to that, where you can have, one of those athletes kind of lead the pack or the group of guys they're working with. And that can potentially help, help out their peers with the lift, or, how to approach the weight room or their training. I think there's a huge benefit to that as well.
Yeah, for sure. So, I ended with this. Everybody does the big things. Everybody goes to practice, shows up to the games. But what separates the average from the great is always
the little things, Coach.
The little things. Appreciate the talk, man.
Thank you for having me, man. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir.